ॐ तव कथामृतं तप्तजीवनं कविभिरीडितं कल्मषापहं श्रवणमङ्गलं श्रीमदाततं भुवि गृह्णन्ति ये भुरिदा जनाः। In our previous class, we were discussing that portion of the gospel where Sri Ramakrishna is having conversation with his devotees in Dakshineshwar. And in the second chapter of that conversation, the subheading that has been given is Conversation with Hazra, dialogue between Guru and disciple. That is the heading. It is 5 o'clock. Thakur is sitting on a step close to the veranda. Rakhal, Hazra and M are seated close to him. Hazra has the attitude of Soham. Soham is a monastic way of sadhana, a sadhana of Jnana Yoga or Advait Vedanta, where you constantly repeat, I am that, Soham. Soham literally means I am that Brahman. So you try to merge your identity, individual identity, with that of Brahman. But it is a very difficult path, and one has to ensure that one has very little or practically no body consciousness before one can say that I am that Soham. Or at least by constant practice, one has to make an effort to transcend the senses. Now, it is very difficult to understand this concept of I am that Soham. Though no doubt it is possible to intellectually make an analysis and show the truth of the statement Tattvamasi or Soham, and even repetition of this Vedic cryptic sentence, which is also part of the Vedas or Upanishads. But to realize it in actuality, in practice, it is a very different thing. So now Hajra Master says has an attitude of Soham. Sri Ramakrishna now is addressing Hajra because he is there with Rakhal and M. He is now telling Hajra that to your way of thinking, all difficulties are over. I mean, he is addressing Hajra and telling these things. It is he who is a believer and it is he who is an atheist. It is he who is good or bad. Here he means, when he says he refers to the Brahman. Then he says it is he who is good or bad. Besides, he is real and also unreal. That is, all the states of sleep, waking, dream, all are also his. And then he is also beyond all states. So now he is giving a background of how difficult it is. Sri Ramakrishna is explaining to Hajra, though he says all the difficulties will be over, but provided you have to believe that whatever is good, whatever is bad, whatever is real, whatever is unreal, and all the three states, waking, you can't say the waking state is real, the sleep state is not real. For everything, if it comes from the Lord or Brahman itself, then all must be the same. There should not be any choice, which is a very difficult thing to do in practice. In theory, it may be easy to say. But anyway, Sri Ramakrishna, he says, all the difficulties will be over if you really reach this state or if you believe in this. And Hajra claimed that he believed in Soham. He is following the path of Soham. That is what Sri Ramakrishna is pointing out to him. Then Sri Ramakrishna gives a beautiful example. He says a son was born to a peasant late in life. He raised that boy with great care. Since he was born after when the peasant had grown up, I mean, was late in his life, that is, he had become aged, but somehow he managed to get a son was born to him and he was taking great care of him. The boy grew up in time. One day the peasant was working in the field when somebody came to him and said, "Your boy is seriously ill. He may not survive." When the man reached home, he saw that his boy was already dead. Anyway, he was serious, but and somebody came to tell him when he was working hard in the fields that your boy was sick, but now he is very serious and he may not live. By the time he reaches home, he is dead. So his wife was weeping bitterly, but the eyes of the peasant remained dry. He did not weep. He was not, he took it rather in a very calm way. She complained to a neighbor sadly, that the wife of that husband. She thought his wife or her husband was very insensitive. He has lost such a nice son, but there is not a single tear in his eye. After a long time, the peasant said to his wife, the peasant did not say anything at that time, but after that he said, "You know why I am not crying? I had a dream last night. I saw that I had become a king and the father of 7 sons. I also saw in that dream that the boys were people of great quality, those 7 sons which were born to him in his dream. As they grew, they acquired knowledge and religion. Then the dream ended. Now I say to myself, should I cry for your one son or these 7 sons?" So, Gyanis, then Sri Ramakrishna explaining the moral or the significance of this story, he says Gyanis believe that the state of dream is as true as the wakeful state. So that is what Sri Ramakrishna was hinting at Hajra. No doubt you believe in that cryptic sentence of the Upanishad, Soham. Soham means I am that. Sa aham, Soham. If Soham is accepted, then everything, the dream state, the deep sleep state, the waking state, all should be the same. So now, if one reaches that state, then whether the son dies in the dream state or the 7 sons die in the dream state, as it happened in case of this farmer, or if he dies in the waking state, for him it is all the same. So he says, "For whom shall I cry? Shall I cry for those 7 people who have died, who were my sons, or should I cry for this one son?" So you can imagine now how difficult it is, though it is very easy to say I am that, but when it comes to accepting that this truth, the truth indeed becomes very, very harsh and maybe difficult to accept in the practical sense. So naturally, the wife was shouting at him. He was complaining to the neighbor. You see, he lost his only son and he is not even weeping. There's not a single tear in his eye. What she meant was for people for whom this world is more real than the dream world or even the other states of mind, for them it is a difficult thing to accept. They may say Soham, but they will not mean it or they will not realize the significance of what is meant by I am that. Then Sri Ramakrishna adds, as a explaining the significance of this parable, he says, "The Lord indeed is the doer. So everything happens according to his will." Hajra, now at least he understands that this is addressed to me, and perhaps Sri Ramakrishna is hinting and trying to explain to me, see how difficult it is. So anticipating that, now Hajra is replying. He says, "But you see, it is very difficult to understand this." So he now has started accepting the fact, though he tries to practice Soham, but he knows with a family to look after, which he was anyway neglecting, and he had left his home just to escape the responsibility of maintaining a family. He had children. Fortunately for him, his in-laws were prosperous enough and they asked the daughter and the children to come and stay with them. So they were looking after his wife and his children. So that made him free to come to Dakshineshwar and practice all sorts of sadhana. But Sri Ramakrishna did not like it. He says, "You are a householder, you have your responsibilities, and you come here and just try to impress everybody by your knowledge of the scriptures and say things which you cannot practice, like Soham and all those things. But anyway, Hajra was a very intelligent person, and he had a lot of convincing power. He became a good friend of Naren also. He used to catch Naren sometimes before he could meet Sri Krishna and boast that he had a lot of knowledge, and he himself had a lot of knowledge, and was trying to discourage him from going to Sri Krishna. Of course, that did not happen, but Hajra was a man of that nature. Then he says, "Sir, it is so difficult to understand this. A sadhu of Bhu Kailas, maybe that is a place in Bengal, was tortured so terribly that he almost died. The sadhu was in samadhi." I mean, he was saying that this sadhu of Bhu Kailas, who somehow managed to reach the state of samadhi, they first buried him, thinking that he is reached samadhi. So what's the point in keeping his body alive? So they alive in the sense preserving his body. So they, as per the tradition, some of the old traditional monks, they do not cremate the body of somebody of their guru who has reached or who has attained samadhi. They will try to bury him alive in the sense, and with uh, the whole body will be buried, and they'll create a memorial on top of that. Because normally, once one enters into samadhi, is not supposed to come back. It's only incarnations like Sri Krishna who used to often go into samadhi and come back to this normal plane. But it is for ordinary jivas, it is difficult. So the sadhu, naturally, they buried him, then they immersed him in water and they branded him with a hot iron. That is how he was brought back to consciousness. But because of such torture, he died. People tortured him, but he died by the Lord's will. Now, this is what Hajra is saying, that people did not know how to handle. They had never seen a samadhi before. Of course, when Sri Krishna went into samadhi, he had instructed his disciples to speak a few mantras or chant some mantras in his ear that brought him back to normal consciousness. But not knowing, the sadhu had apparently not left such instructions. So they thought he has reached a strange state. He's acting, he's almost as if he is dead, he is not moving. So to bring him back, they tried to do all sorts of tortures on his body and even branded him with a hot iron, thinking that the body consciousness will return to that sadhu. He came back. He naturally, by the grace of the Lord, he came back to his normal consciousness. But unfortunately, they had tortured the body so much that he succumbed to that. But Hajra says he perhaps died by the Lord's will. So if everything is Lord's will, then that sadhu's death also should be ascribed to the Lord's will. So Sri Krishna then says, now the topic here, the conversation is going on, but the topic is problem of evil and the immortality of the soul. So everybody believes in some kind of immortality. Either it is going to heaven for eternally or going to hell. But whether one accepts the theory of karma or not, there is this so-called independent will, which one has to take in account when one is performing actions, whether it is Buddhism or Hinduism or Jainism, which believes in the theory of karma, or the other Semitic religions, which apparently do not believe in the theory of karma or rebirth, but they believe in indirectly in the consequences of one's actions. So it's not that you can act according to your will and not be punished for your evil actions. So one has to give an account of what one has done throughout his life, and at least on the final day of judgment, one has to the merits and the demerits, the good actions and the evil actions will be weighed, and finally the decision will be taken whether one will be eternally damned to hell or one will be raised or reach heaven. So some kind of idea of immortality of the soul after death is there in all cultures. But this karma theory, though not accepted by everybody, everybody knows one has to reap the consequences of one's action. So Sri Ramakrishna is saying one reaps the consequences of one's actions. By the Lord's will, no doubt, the sadhu was in samadhi, he died. The Kaviraj makes, now Sri Ramakrishna is giving a beautiful example how to explain whether it was necessary for that sadhu to come back and regain body consciousness, or whether his job was over. So to explain it, Sri Ramakrishna, very complex problem. Why does a soul in come back after he reaches samadhi, voluntarily or involuntarily? Why do incarnations come back? Why do great saints or great teachers of the world come back after having reached the highest state of nirvikalpa samadhi? Now all these things Sri Ramakrishna is explaining. It's a very serious problem in Vedanta philosophy. People would like to know the answers, and there are so many explanations given by acharyas like Shankaracharya and other acharyas, explaining the nature of mukti, explaining the nature of jivan mukti, and whether jivan mukti is possible, and many books are written on that. But Sri Ramakrishna gives a beautiful example. He gives the example of an Ayurvedic doctor who makes Makara Dhwaja in bottles. Makara Dhwaja is made of, there are so many ingredients, which includes a little gold also. So they smear the bottles, all the bottles in which this Makara Dhwaja has to be stored, and that is how the process is described here. Sri Ramakrishna himself describing this process before giving an example of what happens to a realized soul after samadhi. He says, the people Kaviraj, or who makes medicine using gold, as gold is also used among other chemicals for preparing medicines, mercury, so many inorganic substances. Although pure Ayurveda believes in only herbal medicine, medicines made of natural products like oils and other things, but some Rasa Shastra in Ayurveda believes in certain compounds which are having some inorganic materials also, like gold, like mercury. Though they are poisons, you don't eat gold, you don't eat mercury, but in small quantities, if it is mixed with medicines in a very, very minute quantity, they enhance the properties. That is what the Rasa Shastra or Rasa Vidya, which is another branch of Ayurveda, though the traditional Charakas Ayurveda does not believe in that. They don't believe in adding of any inorganic material, which is not having any prana, or some, if it is not a living thing like vegetable, herbs, or even animal substances they may be using, but they never use inorganic. Traditional Ayurveda doesn't accept, but Rasa Shastra was adapted to Ayurveda, and Kavirajas of his Thakur's age used to make this Makara Dhwaja, which is one medicine in which a small quantity of gold is used. So how do they make it? In a furnace, they smear the bottle with mud. Mud is supposed to be, the mold is normally, when gold is cast, it is cast in certain earthen vessels, or vessels made of mud. So in the furnace, the bottles are smeared with mud inside, and then they are put in the furnace. The gold in the bottles, which is inside this, it melts, gets mixed with the other ingredients which form part of the medicine, and then it becomes Makara Dhwaja. So Makara Dhwaja is a Ayurvedic medicine in which gold is mixed with other compounds, organic and inorganic, and then finally it is converted into medicine. But it has to be done in a furnace, and for that glass is used. So glass covered with a lot of mud. The physician then carefully breaks the bottle and takes the Makara Dhwaja out. Obviously, the bottle is of use no longer. Just to hold till the medicine is prepared, the bottle and the mud layer which has been applied to it are useful. Beyond that, the bottle is of no use. After extracting the medicines, After taking the Makara Dhwaja, which has now melted in the furnace and the medicine is ready, the bottle is of no longer of any use. And it makes no difference if it is or it is not there. So they can preserve the bottle or they can throw the bottle as they wish. Similarly, though people killed the sadhu who had reached samadhi in ecstasy, perhaps he had attained the goal. So Bhagwan, after attaining Bhagwan, what does it matter whether the body survives or dies? So if there is some purpose, the cosmic mind or the Ishvara wants something to be achieved through that body, will allow that body to survive. As it happened in the case of Shankaracharya and all, God retained the ego of knowledge or ego of bhakti and permits them, even after realization, to continue for the good of the world. So in some cases the body survives, some cases the body does not survive, and it doesn't really matter, because once the medicine is made, once the gold Makara Dhwaja is made, then it's immaterial, the body or the bottle, whether it is preserved or thrown away. If it is preserved, perhaps it can be used for some other purpose. But in any case, what is important is the medicine, the Makara Dhwaja, not the outer covering. That is what Sri Ramakrishna is trying to say. And he says perhaps the Lord did not have any purpose to serve. So the sadhu of Bhu Kailas, it really did not matter if his body was preserved and if they had not tortured him unknowingly. Of course, they did not do it deliberately. They just tried their best to bring him back to life, thinking he would come back. And he came back, no doubt, but the means they adopted were not good and he died. So distinction, now Sri Ramakrishna is trying to explain why it happened. Why that sadhu, unlike any avatara, did not come back to teach the world or for some other purpose. The Sri Ramakrishna is continuing. He says the sadhu from Bhu Kailas was in samadhi, and samadhi is of various kinds. Now, I would refer you to the very elaborate discussions we had in the last two classes. In fact, I recapitulated what we had discussed in Sutra number 51, because that was the last sutra of the first chapter, which ended with Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And before that, you all know, in Rajoga we have discussed very elaborately the different kinds and varieties of Samadhi. Any concentration can lead to Samadhi if it is intense enough. And that knowledge of the various kinds of Samadhi are elaborately discussed in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. So in the last 2 or 3 talks, we discussed some of the sutras in which this aspect of Sabija, Savikara, Savichara, Nirvichara and all the Samadhis were described. What are the conditions and what happens when one has a particular kind of Samadhi. So Sri Ramakrishna also now is trying to explain in his own simple rustic way that Samadhi is of various kinds. My state, now you see, one has to remember this thing. He is not referring to any book. Most of us, when we give a talk, we either refer to Patanjali because we are not sure of these states. We have not experienced these states. But when Sri Ramakrishna says, that's the advantage of reading the gospel. He will not, like a scholar or an academician, say that in this Purana or in this scripture or this Yoga Sutras, Patanjali says like that. For a modern rationalist or a person like Naren who came and asked, have you seen God? It really does not matter, because after reading so many books, Naren says, I got all the more confused. So he was very eager to know what was the result or what was the conclusion that all these great thinkers have come to. Was there any definite conclusion? Or if there was, then has somebody experienced these realities, these truths? And only Sri Ramakrishna, among all the people whom he approached, including the founder of Brahmo Samaj like Devendranath Tagore, whom he respected so much, in fact followed Brahmo Samaj for some time, they were avoiding that question. When asked, they would simply quote from this scripture, that scripture, and they refused to draw on be drawn into any kind of discussion if they were asked whether they had experienced these states. But Sri Ramakrishna was not like that. He would not tell anybody of anything. If he is quoting somebody, then it is a different issue. But even if he quotes, he substantiates what he is quoting by explaining his own experiences, of which he had many. If you read, so that is why I was contemplating to, along with the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, which is in 5 volumes, to discuss the Great Master or the Divine Play of Sri Ramakrishna on some weekday. I do not know whether I can really do it, but it is important and especially necessary for those who are attending the gospel classes to understand Sri Ramakrishna's life in great detail. Otherwise, it will be partial knowledge. We have to get an idea, especially Swami Shardanandji, who recorded the 5 volumes of wrote the 5 volumes of the Leela Prasang, where he has recorded in minute detail all the incidents, including those that took place in the gospel, and then tried to rationally explain as far as possible the different states, the different experiences, the different visions Sri Ramakrishna had. So it is not enough to just read the gospel, because it has to be read in the light of the life and teachings of Sri Ramakrishna himself, the life especially, because his life has a detailed account, especially the authentic life written by Swami Shardanandji, which was written after a lot of deliberation, after consulting many people, after cross-verifying different incidents, many of the things he heard from people who had met Sri Ramakrishna, who lived with Sri Ramakrishna. So it is a very authentic book. So but in the gospel also we'll find, apart from the gospel, I mean, you will get so many examples where the rationale behind the different experiences or the states of mind of Sri Ramakrishna behind these experiences are explained in greater detail. But here, Sri Ramakrishna also sometimes had a habit of confirming or asking M to record these things, because he was perhaps aware of the mission that M or Master Mahasaya had to play by recording these wonderful words which are there in the gospel. So he's saying now, my state means his own state during sadhana tallied with what the sadhu of Rishikesh said. So that Bhu Kailas perhaps is a place in Rishikesh, or maybe he is referring to some sadhu whom he sadhu of Rishikesh who would have met Sri Ramakrishna. We do not know exactly where and when he met him, but definitely he has spoken to Sri Ramakrishna. Though Sri Ramakrishna did not read about these different samadhi, states of samadhi, which are found in the various scriptures, the idea of Kundalini. There are many things Sri Ramakrishna refers to. It's not that he read all these things. Either somebody told him, or in addition to that, addition to listening from other sadhus and great saints who happen to visit by the Divine Mother's will, who happen to visit Dakshineshwar or meet him in Banaras or some other place when he was on pilgrimage, he would always tally it with his own experiences and then only accept it. So he says, my state tallied with with what the sadhu of Rishikesh had said. Now, what did this sadhu of Rishikesh say? He described the different states of consciousness, the awakening of the Kundalini, which we find nowhere else. We won't get it all in one place. Of course, you will get it in the Great Master, the Divine Play of Sri Ramakrishna. But here in the Gospel, he says, he gives that example, what exactly he experienced when he was approaching the state of Samadhi. He says, sometimes I would find the spiritual current creeping up like an ant in my body. Just as an ant creeps, say an ant is creeping on your back, a bare back, and a big ant. In Calcutta, you'll find those big ants, the big black ants. So they are not like the very small ants These big ants are really big, and you feel that they're slowly creeping up your spine or the back or any other part of the body. So he says he would find a spiritual current slowly creeping up, as if an ant is moving slowly, it is moving up in his body. And sometimes he would not get that creeping sensation or a feeling that the kundalini or that spiritual current, which is uh, a divine type of, you may say, kundalini, it was slowly creeping up. He didn't get that feeling. He just got a feeling that it is hopping, just as a monkey jumps from one branch of the tree to another. So on some days, he would, to his surprise, find that this creeping sensation was replaced by a hopping sensation, and suddenly the consciousness, say from the lowest chakra, it would jump to the heart center and then go up and go down, just as a monkey hops from one branch to another. Of course, it goes up and it goes down also. So also Sri Ramakrishna used to feel that this sensation is just hopping. It would hop up. Sometimes it moved like a fish. Now he says only he who has experienced it can understand by what I mean. So he is trying to explain, it's a difficult thing because unless we experience, we do not know what is this creeping sensation, what is this hopping sensation, and moving sensation like that of a fish. The fish moves horizontally, vertically, and floats very easily, smoothly through water. If somebody has keeps observing the fish, you will find it going deep down, then suddenly slowly coming up, going sideways, going this way, that way. And so maybe he used to feel the spiritual current moving about in his body like a fish moving. So we do not know. And Sri Ramakrishna also is trying to tell us that don't ask me further to explain these things further, because you have to experience it yourself to understand what I am trying to say. He would often used to say that I want to tell everything that I experience, but somehow something is holding my neck, my throat, and not allowing me to speak. The Divine Mother is holding my throat. What he meant was, he was powerless to explain the unexplainable. These things are perceivable by the higher, by transcending the senses, and we are still bound by the senses to this gross body. So to explain these subtle feelings through the gross feelings or feelings of the gross body, like an ant creeping on the back or a monkey hopping, you can at the most give an indirect explanation of the experience, but direct experience may be something different. We would know how the current floats like a fish, or hops like a monkey, or crawls up like uh, like a ant would do. So but he mentions certain other things which are more important. First, he says he who has experienced it can understand. Then what happens is more important. If that has happened, then the experience is true, because many people come with this, they just read these books, and then when they find, due to some reason, some maybe irritation in the skin, they feel something is creeping up, and then they think the kundalini is rising. So to prevent all these things, misunderstandings, Sri Ramakrishna immediately adds something which is a test to prove whether our experiences are true. He says the next thing that happens, he forgets the world. Now, if these creeping sensations or the hopping sensation or these other sensations which are described in the yoga scriptures or the yoga texts or even the tantra texts, if they are really happening, if they are genuine experiences, then Sri Ramakrishna says you have to forget the world. But if somebody is getting immersed in the world after these experiences, is still attached to woman and gold, and if he is still attached to the world and concerned about it and continues to be gross and worldly, then these experiences have no value, or they are hallucinations. They are not real experiences. So he says he forgets the world, and then when his mind goes down a little, the mind has to be raised to such a level that the sadhaka or the aspirant who experiences these states doesn't feel like going back to the world. He feels it's a great filth to even have anything to do with the world. He not only forgets the world, but if he, by chance, if the world comes back to him, he prays to mother. He says, please cure me. I would like to talk. I mean, he goes to such a high state that Sri Ramakrishna used to request mother, please cure me. See, I am unable to explain these experiences to others because he is feeling he has almost forgotten the world. He has transcended the world. So to come back to the world, to talk to the devotees, to explain to them, he is very keen because he was compassionate. He did not want to enjoy the mango himself, as he gave the beautiful example. Some of them eat the mango and don't tell it to others. Some of them share the mango with others if they like the taste. So he was a superior type of uh, avatara who believed that these experiences which I have experienced, I should share it with the whole world so that they also get the benefit. I should not be selfish. But, and for that, when his mind came down a little, he used to pray to the mother, oh, mother, please allow me to talk so that I can explain. Because at that state, most of the people, because they forget the world, they forget the power of articulation or speech which they had before they went into samadhi, and it is with great difficulty that these great truths, so that is why most of the realizations in the Upanishads, when they gave these cryptic sentences, prajnanam brahma, aham brahmasmi, and all those things, they found words not enough to describe, and it takes a commentator or somebody who has experienced these truths to explain these truths to us. Otherwise, what does it mean? Soham, soham, it never meant anything to Hajra. He was just repeating it. But what was the experience he had? Did he have that experience of aham, soham? I am that. What does he mean by I am that? I am definitely not that. I am not Brahman. I don't feel that I am one with Brahman. So, such people, for them, these Upanishads and these words are just words. They have no reality. But for a person who has realized them, he goes to a state where he forgets the world, and as Sri Ramakrishna did, he struggles to try to explain to the world, and he prays to the mother out of compassion, oh mother, please allow me to talk, otherwise these people who are all sitting around me, they will miss all these things. The people who are eagerly waiting for some truth from my lips, I am not able, because that experience transcends the speech, transcends the mind even. So to bring it down and to articulate it in the form of speech is extremely difficult. So Sri Ramakrishna adds now, he says, unless one belongs to the class of Ishwar Kotis. Now this is a category which has been described in many of the Vaishnava scriptures. It literally means Ishwar Kotis, eternally free and perfect souls who are not born because of their karma, but they are eternally free. But they are born on the earth for the good of mankind with at least some of the characteristics of the avatara. They may not all have all the characteristics. They normally come as companions. So it is said that Sri Ramakrishna also came with so many Ishwar Kotis. Some of the one was Narendra, of course, one of the Saptarishis, who was requested to come so that he can help him in his mission. Certain aspects of the avatara they possess. They may possess a part of the different aspects of which the avatara is the full manifestation. So these, unless one belongs to the level or the class of Ishwar Kotis, Sri Ramakrishna says, one cannot return to life after Samadhi. So one condition is that only an Ishwar Koti after Samadhi, after the highest Samadhi, of course, can come back and do the normal transaction with the world, because he belongs to a special class. Some people go into samadhi as a result of their sadhana, but they don't return. That is what happens with most of the jivatmas who are not Ishwar Kotis. But when God himself comes as man, as an avatar, he has the key to liberation, to the liberation of human beings in his hand. So he comes with a special power which even Ishwar Kotis do not have. Ishwar Kotis fulfill a part of the mission of the Avatara, and they are not born because of their karma, but they can return to normal life in the body even after samadhi, and not lose the body after 21 days, as it happens in the case of people, jivas, ordinary jivas who reach samadhi. So, but God comes with an additional power. He has the key. He comes with a key to the liberation of human beings in his hand. So that is why, though Patanjali does not clearly mention it, it is worthwhile to meditate on an avatara, or at least an Ishwar Koti. Ishwar Koti also has the capacity, but he doesn't have the special capacity. He doesn't have the key to the liberation. That is why Swamiji used to say, I wish I could uh, give you mukti by touch. He told some of his disciples, I wish I could give you mukti by touch as my master used to do, because he had the key to the liberation of human beings, whoever came. And as he told Naren, the key is with me, he had deliberately locked it. He says, I'm locking it now. Because in Naren's case, because he was Ishwar Koti, he did not have to attain liberation. He was a liberated soul, but Sri Krishna, under his own power of Maya, as Sri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, through the power of Maya, he locked that realization and said, I'll open it only when your job is over. When the mission for which you came to earth with me or after me to fulfill some aspects of my Leela, after those things are over, then I'll open the key. So he has the key, and he decides when he will open the door to that infinite samadhi. So then he says he has the key. Here he means the avatara. God himself comes as man, that is avatara. He has the key to the liberation of human beings in his hand. Then he returns from samadhi for the good of humanity. That is the explanation that Swami Shardananji gives when he tries to explain the difference between an avatara and a ordinary Ishwar Koti, or a ordinary soul. Of course, the ordinary soul is way below. Even if with all his efforts he reaches into samadhi like this sadhu of Bhu Kailas, it is very rare that he will come back. So no wonder people try to thrash him and beat him, and then he could not come back. So that shows that he was a Jivatma, and by the grace of the Lord, of course, he had the highest experience of Samadhi. And Sri Krishna says it doesn't really matter whether, because only Ishwar Kotis can come back, and Avataras remain in this world as long as they want. They have a desire, or maybe they have they decide that they will open the doors to liberation to many souls who are struggling for several lives. So that's why they say when avatars come, they carry lot of jivas with them. So that is the special quality of an incarnation which Sri Krishna is described. Now M is thinking to himself. He is not recording or writing something. He's no doubt noting it, but he's thinking aloud. He says, M is trying to say to himself, does Thakur hold the key to liberation of human beings in his hand? You should remember that this conversation took place quite early in Sri Krishna's life, and M had just come. So perhaps that faith about the divinity or the nature of Sri Krishna as an avatar had not dawned upon M fully. So he is asking himself, what does Thakur mean by this? Does he want to imply that he has the key to liberation of human beings in his hand? If as he says, God himself has come as man, as an avatara, then he has the key to the liberation of human beings in his hand. That means if Sri Krishna is an avatara, he should have this key and he can liberate human beings at will. So anyway, this is a thought which came to M, but Hajra immediately interferes and says something. He says one can succeed just by pleasing the Lord even without the avatara. Now, this was typical of Brahmo devotees or other people who somehow could not reconcile to the fact that a human being an avatara can come as a human being. They did not want to, even if they knew that this is mentioned in the scriptures. So that is why Sri Ram Krishna used to tell Girish and others, how many people will believe in an avatara? Even during Rama's incarnation, only a few rishis and Shabari and others could recognize him as an avatara. Rest of them just thought he was a king, a noble king, a very strong king, a warrior, and all those things, and a son of Dasharatha, and all those things. But how many knew that he was an avatara? So also, Hajra is one of them, and definitely would not accept Ramakrishna as an avatara. In fact, he was discouraging people from going to him, that he doesn't have full knowledge and all those things. So is trying to argue with Sri Ramakrishna that can we not succeed by pleasing the Lord, Ishvara, even without the avatara? So even if he comes as a human being or doesn't come as a human being, what's the need? We can directly go to the Lord, to avatara. Sri Ramakrishna then laughs. He knew he could read the mind of Hajra. So he says, yes, yes. There is a big registration office in Vishnupur. Now, even that he explains in a very beautiful way. He says, yes, yes, there is a big registration office in Vishnupur. If you get the deed registered there, you don't have to bother about the Goghat office. I mean, what he means is perhaps the Vishnupur office is the headquarters or the main office where there is a big registration office. But if you go to the smaller office here, maybe the time taken will be more. Goghat may be a smaller district office or a smaller office where it may take time to process the application, to do the registration deed get registered there. So avatara is like that. Avatara may be compared to Sri Ramakrishna is perhaps trying to make fun and saying that yes, if you have direct access to Ishvara, why don't you go there? But since it is difficult for everybody to go, the avatara himself comes down and makes the task easy. So registration in the Goghat office, that is the local office, is as effective. Maybe it may take time, but if you can't go to Vishnupur, this is the only alternative. So indirectly saying, yes, though it is possible to directly go without any intermediary like the avatara, which Vedanta believes. We don't believe that one has to go only through the avatara. There are so many ways, so many paths to God. The path of Jnana, in fact, does not believe even in Ishvara. Patanjali also directly doesn't believe in Ishvara, though it says that Ishvara Pranidhanat, by worshipping Ishvara, the task may become easy. But it's not important. So one can directly go and attain Brahman if the will is strong. So he says, yes, if you can go directly to Vishnupur, why don't you go? So now, before we start the new conversation, the heading is changed, but it is the same place, the dialogue between Guru and disciple and life of Thakur. He gives a lot of hints about his own life, about his Guru Shakti, what he achieved or what he was trying to achieve. It is Tuesday, the new day of the moon. It is dusk. Aarti is being performed in the temple. Conches, shells, bells, and other instruments are being sounded in the 12 Shiva temples, in Radhakanta's temple and that of Mother Bhavatarini. After the Aarti is over, Sri Ramakrishna passes through his own room to the southern veranda. It is pitch dark, but lamps are lit at various places in the temple. The Bhagirathi or the Ganges reflects the dry, dark sky on its bosom. It is the new day of the new moon, so Sri Ramakrishna slipped easily into bhava. Today his bhava is becoming intense. From time to time he is uttering the word Om, 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 and also occasionally mother's name. It is hot weather. The room is very hot, so he has come to the veranda. A devotee is offering offering of a thinly woven mat is now spread on the veranda. So somebody had offered a thin mat, so instead of sitting on the floor, they spread that thin mat. And these days, Thakur thinks about the Divine Mother all the 24 hours. He talks in a whisper with Mani as he lies on the mat. And then he says, look, the Lord can be seen. So and so has seen him, but please don't talk of it to others. Well, which one do you like better, God with form or God without form? So he is now in such a great mood that for him God has become tangible, whether God with form or without form. He says God can be seen. He is assuring Master Mashay, and he is almost on the verge of giving him realization. And he says, which one do you like to see, God with form or God without form? So Mani, who was had a Brahmo background, says, at present I have a greater liking for God without form. Even so, I am realizing gradually that he has taken all the different forms. So now a great, wonderful conversation will go on. We'll not start it today. So this is the background. Sri Krishna now, after Aarti, is in a great divine mood of compassion, and he's having a conversation with Mani, who is M only. He used various pseudonyms to record all these conversations so that people will not feel that there's only one person present in that conversation. Though he was always present, he tried to hide himself, and he is recording now, and he sees Sri Krishna coming to him. Then he says, then he explains a lot of things about his own sadhana, how the Lord in the form of Guru, or the Lord took the form of different gurus without even his asking them to come, and came and made him practice so many spiritual disciplines through so many paths and realize God. So that is a very big topic. So I'll take it up next time, and I'll just see if there are some questions, and we'll conclude for today. Yeah. Pranam, can Jivatmas become Ishwar Kotis? Yes, definitely. There is at least record of one Jiva Koti or Jiva, or one saint, Swami Shivanandji, or Mahapurush Maharaj as he is known. He seems to have mentioned towards the end of his life that by the grace of Sri Krishna, he has made me an Ishwar Koti. That means this was his last life. He had made him an Ishwar Koti so that he could come down from the state of Samadhi, because he was the second president of the order after Brahmananda. Brahmanandaji was an Ishwar Koti, but because he became the president of the order after him, and he practically became a personification of Thakur, or Thakur acted and spoke and acted through him. So he, towards the end, perhaps he felt, or he realized, that it is only possible by Sri Krishna's grace that he has converted a Jiva Koti, or a ordinary sadhaka, or a Jiva, to a Ishwar Koti. So that is possible. Definitely it is possible. It depends on the Ishwara or his avatara. Why Thakur does not unlock liberation to everybody? Why not transcended divine mood, give transcended divine mood to others? Just because one is not prepared. It is as simple as that. We know that if a certain voltage, a bulb has a certain voltage beyond which if you charge that bulb, it will simply go off. It won't work. So everybody has a capacity to express the divine. One has to, as Thakur says very clearly, that one has to gradually detach himself from the world. So he can definitely give liberation if we want it. The question is, he can unlock. He has already unlocked. Mahapurush Maharaj used to say that in this incarnation, Brahmanand used to say, and Swami Vireshwaran used to quote this, that the door to liberation has been opened by Thakur, but we have to push it. So he doesn't have to unlock like in the case of previous incarnations. In this incarnation, he has unlocked it, but unfortunately, we do not want to go there. Our attachments to this world, our attachments to the gross positions, are we ready to give it up? Then the door to liberation is already open. We have to just push, and Thakur will make it possible. But the problem is, we do not want the transcendental, because we want the immanent. We are so much immersed. We love our immanent. We are so much attached. We just don't want to give up our attachment to the gross. If that is the case, then even if the door is open, if you don't want to enter, if we don't want to enter, even if the door is unlocked, what's the use? If we refuse to go, we say, okay, we know the door is open, but I don't want to go it right now. I am very busy with my family, with my relatives, with my money, with my deposits, with my property. They are holding me down. So I am not ready to, right now, I'm not in a position to even pass through an unlocked door, leave alone unlocking it. In the olden days, the earlier days, the sadhus, even after giving up the world, they found it difficult because somebody had to unlock the door for him, or they had to find the key to unlock it. But in this Kali Yuga, it's so strange. Thakur himself says that the door is unlocked, but people don't want to, uh, really don't want liberation, because for that they have to make, we all have to make tremendous sacrifices. If we are ready, if we really feel disgusted with this world, if we really feel that there is nothing worth attaching to in this gross world, and the more we move away from the gross, or move away from these attachments, the more we will be attached to the ideal of mukti, moksha, or the ideal of avatara, who is the doorway to mukti. So I shall take your leave now. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
Thank you, Swamiji. Namaste.
Namaste.